Okay, theoretically, here we go again. So, if this is the first one you're seeing of what we're doing here tonight, um, you're sort of jumping in the middle here, but this is a randomly generated Nanowrimo writing project. This is, you may be wondering if National Novel Writing Month is November, how is it you're doing this right now? Well, life is interesting, but I've done this before where I've done a weekend where I've done the whole novel, 50,000 words in the course of the weekend. So it's not impossible. But that being said, I'm not going to pretend there's a very good chance that there won't be things that interfere with my ability to keep working. I will continue to keep working, and I will aim for 50,000 words by the end of the month. So, what we did for the first installment of this was come up with our concept using my homemade random generation tables. Man, the reverse on the camera is trippy. Okay, so we've got a set of tables that we rolled dice on, and in the first video we rolled for the basic concept of the story. Last time we did some fleshing out with some rolls to determine a little bit more, and this time we're going to get some of the last details and discuss like last time we did some of the basic concepts of the outline, and this time we're going to do sort of basic structuring elements. So, to recap, we started with, do you hear that noise outside? We started with genre. We rolled up a 8, which was 2 options. Option 1 that we rolled was fantasy. No, option 1 that we rolled was wuxia, which was fantasy, and then we did adventure. And we went to the fantasy table, we rolled another d8, and we got wuxia, or Chinese martial arts fantasy. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I should just change that on the table, but it is what it is. And then on the adventure table, we rolled up steampunk, or gaslight. So this is a Chinese martial arts fantasy steampunk story. Then we rolled the type, which is the top of this corner over here. And what we rolled for that was a puzzle story. And then we rolled on the sort of story premise going forward. It was in a world of, and we rolled mundane life, something changes the status quo, and it is a cultural change. So 4. One character, we rolled a noble. We didn't need to roll an adventurer class for that character because we didn't roll that adventurer class. Must, and we rolled 2 options. The first one was gather something, and the second one was steal or liberate object or person. So a noble must gather, and I decided at that point that heroes, a group of heroes. 2, we rolled a 3, weaken. The villain was a 1, we rolled monster. And then we went with monster rolling. We did a hooves, mechanical, scaly, humanoid, masked. I believe it was sci-fi. It may have been body horror. With air powers. And that was our monster. And then we did who's preventing the goal from being achieved by capturing and imprisoning. So we switch back over to must steal and liberate object or person. And the twist at the end is the villain was not wrong. And that was the whole basic premise. We did play around with a little bit with the character traits. So I believe the lead character is an emotional, desire-driven character, and he may become creative imaginative, I think was what we did with that. I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't know that that's a useful tab to play with just yet. We've got a new set of tables today to play with if you want to explore those as we go. But that's sort of where we're starting from as our starting point. Going forward, I'm going to do a little bit of delving into some of the things that we need to fill in. So, some of what we went over more of the details yesterday with elaborating on the story outline. So just a quick appraisal of where we ended up was the end of the story you pick first because that's where you're going to end up. That tells you where you have to start to get up there. So the end of the story is based off of the premise of the villain being a artificial intelligence, a thinking machine, a steampunk thinking machine, who's covered in the flesh of mystical creatures, and made to appear as a rebel leader who will inspire the peasant population to uprise and overthrow the empire. And so establishing herself as a leader of the new empire, being a puppet of these industrialist outsiders, is part of how they're the industrialist outsiders are trying to overthrow the empire, the largest empire in the world, and install their own puppet at the leadership of that empire. And their puppet is this thinking machine dressed up like a human with masks and the flesh of mystical creatures to appear human. And there is an element of industrializing that would benefit the population, but there's also an element of progressiveness, where a female leader for the population is something that would have been unheard of under the emperor's patriarchal lead. So there's that element of it. So the villain is kind of right in a certain sense. Progressive ideas and industrialization for the betterment of the population would be beneficial. But the way they go about doing what they're doing is wrong or evil. So the methods don't support the mean. The means do not support the method. The means do not justify the ends, or the ends don't justify the means. Somewhere along there is a phrase that makes sense. Right now I'm not processing it right. So we have that as our end point. As our starting point, to have a noble character in a setting, story type where it's usually more of a Robin Hood type character who's a outlaw or a wanderer who stands up for the people, not the empire. It's a little tricky to do this right, but I feel like the peasant rebellion for the thinking machine has the peasant rebellion elements that mesh well with the uprising in Russia that overthrew Tsar Nicholas and his family, which brings us the story of Anastasia as the start point. So we have this idea of a royal family. In the musical of Anastasia, it's generally portrayed as a glorious, kind, loved empire, and then you have the overthrow happening at the behest of and under the influence of Rasputin, a mystical, monstrous person who survived stabbings, shootings, hangings, drownings, castration, and whatnot. And so he survived all these things that no normal human would survive. So the Rasputin character is sort of a replacement for, or the thinking machine is sort of a replacement for the Rasputin character. Now, the Rasputin character got his abilities by making a bargain with dark forces, and I feel like the dark forces are a good analog for the outside industrialists trying to hold sway and control the Chinese empire. Now, there's a little bit of a Boxer's Rebellion element. There's a little bit of the Shun dynasty between Ming and Qing Empire, Qing Empire. And so there's a little bit of those elements involved in there. And so we have the end and the beginning sort of established. And then because of the way we rolled it, we have this idea of collecting a group of heroes with extraordinary abilities. Because it is Chinese martial arts fantasy, their abilities to use martial arts to do unusual and amazing things is kind of part of the fantasy. So I envision it as a little bit of Baron Munchausen, a little bit of Robin Hood, and a touch of Braveheart as how we're doing this, because he's going to assemble his crew. There's going to be the conflict that happens that reveals that the main character was a noble of the ruling class and not one of the peasants that he is helping with the uprising. And that sort of sense of betrayal is what allows the villain to divide and conquer the group of heroes, capture them, imprison them in places that counter their abilities. And then the hero has to go and rescue his allies and then ultimately confront the villain, defeating them, but realizing that the villain wasn't wrong, just what they did was wrong. And so that's the sort of layout we have to do. This does tend to presuppose that the story is going to end up being done as a series of collect the heroes, because we rolled last time for how many hero allies there are. There are 4 of them. And how many of the stories will be stories of the first meeting and recruiting of the heroes, the story of the conflict that divides them, and the story of the rescuing each of the heroes from their situation. That part is going to be where the puzzle comes into play, in which the abilities we learn about from the first set of recruitment stories about each of the heroes and how each of them is trapped with the counter to their ability, and how there's somebody else's ability that will break them free, so you have to get them out in a certain order. So that's where the puzzle story element comes into play. And so we're up to speed now, that's where we are. Going forward now, one of the things we want to do is establish concepts like how many outsider industrialists are there to deal with, but more importantly, how many hero allies, who are they and what are their abilities. And I had an abortive attempt to do that last night after the glitch with recording video, but I burnt out and it made a mess of it. So one of the things we'll do is we'll just do it again. Like last night when we reshot the video, originally I had rolled for what gender the hero was, male or female. Um, I feel like the villain being female is important to the idea of a culture shock and a realization that the villain wasn't wrong in seeking progressive change for the culture. So I think the villain being female works. Going past that to other ideas of the industrialists, the outsider industrialists, and the hero's allies, I think we can roll up. We could theoretically roll up the gender of each of the characters, but for starters, let's just roll up them as a character on this table here and subsequent tables. Motivations and abilities. And see where that gets us. We can do the even odd roll for male female for each of them if we need to, and we can do that sort of for a number of how many outsider industrialists we have to deal with, and we can go through defining the outsider industrialist characters further if we have to. I feel like those have to be more of a one, like, simple character concepts. They don't all deserve a major conflict concept, but we might be able to use some of the character table here for detailing some of their character qualities. So, starting out with our 4 heroes, the 4 hero allies, I guess we should call them, because the Baron, the young Baron, as I refer to him, Baron Munchausen. I will look up an alternative methodology for naming as we go forward. I do think that I could potentially roll up. I think I looked up a Chinese martial arts name generator. And we will do. Okay, that's interesting. We will do a little bit of exploration of some of that option as we go. So, starting with rolling tables. So, I will do a single character at a time, because that was one of the mistakes I made yesterday. I need to roll up and save the information as we roll it up. So, character 1, roll a d8. We've got a 4. So one of the characters will be one of the outsiders. And now it doesn't have to be one of the industrialist outsiders, but I mean, it could be a hermit or somebody living outside of the general society, but still part of the culture of the setting. And so that character is all set. The second character we rolled up is an adventurer class. So that means we go to the next table and we roll again, and that'll be a 3. So a monk Okay, let's roll a third character. And I think we rolled a 1. So another adventurer. 4. So a wizard, warlock, or sorcerer. Sorcerer. Now, one of the things I debated about yesterday was whether or not the hero's allies can all be rescued, or if one of them is lost and the replacement during the rescue is from the outsiders. So we'll use the oracle potentially to do that. So roll again for the last hero. We roll a 3. So our 3 says we go back up here. A noble. So we've got a noble, a wizard, or a sorcerer. Now let's ask it whether or not, so let's ask our oracle if this outsider is the replacement for another character, or if it's always from the beginning that this character is one of the outsiders that they rescue, or will serve or help the people. So roll a d8. We rolled a 1, so that's a yes and. So that's definitely a replacement. So we have to roll up one other character. So roll up a new character. 8. A workman, I believe. So that was a artisan, craftsman, or merchant. So who is it we lose? So we could lose the monk, sorcerer, noble, or craftsman for the outsider to become a member of the group. There's an element of this being martial arts fantasy that tells me that the monk is sort of the mentor, the Obi-Wan character that we lose along the way. So I'm thinking that's partly where we're going to end up going. But what I think we need to do is, I'm going to do this a little bit differently than maybe I would have done it yesterday. Each one of these characters needs a motivation and an element or an ability that they have that makes them superhuman and valuable to the cause. So I think in one degree or another that the outsider has to be the one that replaces the ability missing from the lost character. So who do we lose is an important question at a certain point. But right now, let's do a roll-up of the new table, which is our characters' motivations, modus operandi, abilities, and then these are subtables for each of those. So motivations might be a crime table, abilities might be elemental abilities. So let's hit those tables right now, and we won't link them directly to. So I won't roll the monk, sorcerer, noble, and craftsman in order of ability. They will just be sort of mix and match what makes the most sense. Theoretically. So, a d20 on, let's do ability first. This is a 6. Hard-headed. And that can be very literal. That can be somebody can stop a sword blade with their forehead or slam their head through a wall. Okay, so next we do $14. I didn't show you the 6, did I? Shoot. All right. 14. Can heal any injury or illness. Heal any illness. I think that's important to distinguish, because if we're going to lose a character, it can't be to illness, it must be to injury, because injury is distinct from illness in this regard. So, next in line we have $11. Blow wind. Now it's interesting to note where I got some of this list of abilities that we can look into in a minute. But let's finish generating the list. 17. Immunity to burning. One, two, three, four. So we need a 5th one to generate. $13. Can cry a river. Cry a river. Now, healing any illness was, these abilities were largely gotten from some reworking of the there's a couple of old stories. There's a children's book for the US called The 5 Chinese Brothers, based off of an old Chinese legend called the 10 Chinese Brothers. And each of them has a certain ability. Like the story starts with the oldest Chinese brother going out into a boat to catch fish for the market. And the way he does this is he has the ability to drink up the ocean. So the ocean dries up. They collect the fish off the bottom of the ocean. He gets back into the boat, releases the ocean back into the land, and the water rises the boat. He goes back to shore with his catch, and he makes his money. And so he has a young boy that joins him on one of these days. He sucks up the ocean and holds it, has the boy collecting fish, and he gestures frantically for the boy to come back because he can only hold it for a short period of time. But the boy ignores him, and so the older brother has to let the ocean go, and the child drowns. And so as a murderer for his crime, he's put on trial, and part of the story is that his brothers all look like him. So each of the brothers shows up in his stead for the sentencing of his death sentence. And each of his death sentences are going to chop your head off. So the iron neck can't chop his head off. It stops the blade. They're going to try to drown him. And so there's one that was the length of his legs were, or he was stretchy enough that he could stretch his legs down to the bottom of the ocean, and so you couldn't drown him because he would keep himself above it, and so forth. And each of these brothers has a different ability. They look like their brother, so it looks like there's no way to kill this character. So after repeatedly trying to execute this criminal for his murder crime, they find that like there's no way to kill him, so they pardon him. And that's the Chinese brothers' story. It's told as slightly differently because they're different sets of abilities. And so I took a lot of those abilities down. I modified a few of them because a few of them were like stretchy and invulnerable. And that seems too overpowered for a character in a story other than a parable style story. And I think one of the older stories, the 10 Chinese brothers had hard-headed and super brain or super intelligence were the same ability. So he had an iron head and super was the smartest of the brothers. And I split that up a little bit so that we could have a little less of the superhuman brothers, each one just having an ability, not a suite of abilities that make them super powerful. So what we've got here is hard-headed, heal any illness, which in this version was heal any illness by crying on the wound, or the sickness, or the victim of the illness. And I think that was also part of the could cry a river. I'm a little mixed up on whether or not that's the case. Healing any illness by crying on it and cry a river were the same ability in the stories, but they're right now two separate abilities. So heal any illness, cry a river. Hard-headed, blow like the wind, immune to burns. So we've sort of got an air-themed power, which, using the Chinese elements, there's no air on this list here. But we've got air, water, hard-headed could be a rock-headed, earth, and immune to burns, so fire. So we could elementally do this. That's a reasonably reasonable challenge. All right, so how are we assigning these? So the outsider is a later addition. The sorcerer, the monk can heal any illness. The noble can blow the wind. He's a windbag. He's a windbag. The artisan craftsperson is immune to burns, so they can do their work of candle making or metal smithing without being burned. Sorcerer can create rivers of water. Now, sorcerer crying. I don't know about that. Feel like I feel like the outsider having, like, I feel like it's sort of important to have the elemental nature of this. So the earth, air, fire, water elements, as much as it's not the Chinese elements, it's a different model. It's the classical Greek elements in that regard. Healing any illness could fall into the category of. So let's pull this back up here. So we have the earth, air, fire, water, spirit. That's theoretically that's the spread that we're looking at roughly with the abilities here. So we're looking at the earth being hard-headed, the air being blowed like the wind, fire resistant, water production, and healing any illness. And if we lose the character of the monk later on, he becomes a spirit like Obi-Wan, theoretically. That's doable. Okay, so monk heals injuries. Who has the hard head? So the spirit access of the monk goes away. Who's crying the river? The sorcerer? Or the noble? I just have a vision of whoever's ability to cry a river, just sprinkler heads out of the eyes, just gushing out of the eyes. Okay, so maybe not cry a river. We may do a slight modification here. So we have cry a river, and we're looking at this source material stating that of the Chinese brothers, you had the one brother who could drink the ocean and hold it for a very short period of time. So drink the ocean. Drink and hold an ocean or a river. That seems to me, and I would wager you the older version of the 10 Chinese brothers, that was probably because that's where he got the ability to cry a river. So that's interesting. Let's do drink a river. And spit a river. So it's essentially a fire hose. Okay, so that could be. Who do we do drink the river, and who do we do? Like the hard-headed could be the outsider. Or the hard-headed could be the noble. So let's figure out if we can roll up who they belong to. So let's use the oracle, I think, probably. Okay, so I would say clearly the monk has to be heal any. He's the healer. And so when he's unable to survive, they lose their healer, so nobody can heal him back. Artisan immune to burns. Okay, drink spit a river. Blow like the wind. I feel like the sorcerer blowing like the wind is potentially a better option. Okay, and then we have to figure out who's drinking rivers and whose head is hard as steel or rock. So, is the noble drinking rivers or hard-headed? So, let's say, is it a... It was kind of funny to do a windbag, but that could be the sorcerer. But, is it a hard-headed politician or a noble? So let's roll on the table of 8. 5. No, but I feel like that but is an important qualifier. So the politician or the noble is the drinker of rivers. Which makes the outsider the hard-headed character. Which makes sense to have the steampunk characters with a steel plate in his head or something like that. So the noble is drinker of rivers, but, so he's not hard-headed, but the qualifier there could be character traits. So let's do a swing through that setup, and then we'll do a motive table potentially, and then I think we'll call it for this video, and then I'll be back for subsequent exploration. So we're looking for character traits, one, there, 5, savvy negotiation. That sounds like the noble. Okay, roll 2. Seven. It's going to be prestigious or judgmental or discerning. Okay, we do 3. I don't know who that would be. Six, creative. That sounds like the craftsperson to me. Next we roll up a 3, command driven, or commander or purpose driven. One, two, three, four. So one more on that set, and then we do modus operandi. Four, loyalty. So loyalty could go with being hard-headed, but the character of the noble wasn't hard-headed. So the noble being loyal to the nobility and hard-headed, but not technically hard-headed ability. So that might be valuable as a mindset. So that might be the noble who drinks rivers, who's loyal to the nobility. And so they may be the hard one to convince to work with them to overthrow the new empire. Well, they may be able to be convinced to overthrow the new empire, but the reinstatement of the old empire might be their goal. So, purposeful or command-driven might be the outsider. Creative is the craftsperson. Savvy negotiation is the savvy negotiation might be the sorcerer. Prestigious, or maybe the sorcerer is prestigious. We'll figure out. Is the sorceress? Okay, are we? Let's do that. That was one of the things we need to do too. So let's go back to modus operandi first. So we're going to go here, here, MO. So let's do 20. $18, fabric or textiles or fashion. Textiles, okay, and then did I show you that? $18. Next one is the 2, love. 14, art. 'So that's 3. 11, jewelry. Wow, they're all into luxury goods, I guess. And 1, in hiding. Jewelry. So textiles, love, art, jewelry, in hiding. Those are the motives for why the characters are in the situation they're in. So the tradesperson may be in jeopardy because of the textiles being seized by imperial outsiders. The monk or the noble would be in hiding. The monk art doesn't have to be a visual art. It could be martial art. Love, jewelry. So who we like the sorcerer could be into the jewelry, and I'll have to think about that. We're kind of running up on time here, so I will source some of that out. Let's do our even odd for gender of characters. So starting with the outsider. Even male, odd female. I'm not saying that females are odd, but the outsider is male. The monk, female. Does that even work? Were there female monks? Female. Okay, so sorcerer, noble, and craftsperson. Let's do sorcerer and noble in 2 sets. So female, male. So it's a sorceress. We might change some of that around. I do feel like a noble in hiding. And the last one. I got double, I rolled 2, but double female on the craftsperson. I feel like that's not quite right. So we may move some of that around. I may sit on that for a little while and ponder it, see whether or not it makes sense. As we approach another hour episode, I think this is getting to be a pattern here. So I'll figure out where they all fit, whether the modus operandi, the character traits, and the genders fit where they fit. So we have 1, 2, 3 females and 2 males. So whether or not we sort them or we decide whether or not they were locked in with where they were. I will call it here because that's a good place to stop, and I will catch you for the next one.